he would never know just how strong his own scent really was. That surprising revelation came from Paul McCartney in an interview with BBC Radio's program Legends Unfiltered. It wasn't about hit songs or iconic recording sessions, but rather about odors, the natural scent Paul had to endure through thousands of performances with his legendary bandmates. On stage, they appeared in glamorous outfits, with perfectly styled hair and dazzling lights. But their natural body odor often caused people to take a step back. Perspiration that hadn't dried, outfits that weren't changed frequently, and countless other factors combined to reveal a reality very different from the perfect image seen under the spotlight. So, who were these legends? Stay with the story, because the last person on the list made Paul exclaim, "That scent was really something." Oh my. First, Elvis Presley. His perspiration was so strong that you could tell he was in the room the moment you stepped inside. Stories like these circulate in the music world, but few have dared to recount them honestly. In a behind-the-scenes interview with BBC radio reporter Janet Morgan in late 2008, Paul McCartney shared a memory he said he could never forget. It had nothing to do with melodies, performance techniques, or production secrets. It revolved around something seemingly minor, yet powerful enough to overwhelm anyone who walked into the room: the natural scent of Elvis Presley. On the evening of August 27, 1965, when Paul, John, George, and Ringo visited the Bear Mansion to meet Elvisa, historic encounter covered by Melody Maker, NME, and even Time magazine, they did not expect what would stay with them most. Elvis was rehearsing for a new MGM film, finishing a series of intense moves that left him drenched in sweat. The rehearsal room was completely closed, with only one struggling air conditioner and harsh studio lights shining directly on him. When Paul opened the door, the first thing that hit him wasn't music, but a dense, warm, pungent scent, like damp clothes sealed in a box for too long. Paul described it as the moment he cracked open the door, he already knew Elvis was inside. He froze for a few seconds before forcing himself to step in, each step bringing another layer of scent that made him stand near the window to catch his breath. John Lennon reportedly seemed uneasy. George Harrison repeatedly adjusted the thin mask he often wore in Hollywood, and Ringo tried to stay composed. Meanwhile, Elvis appeared completely unfazed, continuing his rehearsal without concern for perspiration or outfit changes. A Backstage RCA employee noted in a leaked internal memo that Elvis's rehearsal outfits had to be replaced frequently because the scent lingered so strongly. Earlier in 1965, Tiger Beat magazine had even published an article titled "Elvis and His Mysterious Late-Night Training Habits," describing how RCA's gym room often carried a strong presence in the air. After his rehearsals, the article survived only 2 days before being taken down. Rumors circulated in Los Angeles media circles that Elvis's management had requested its removal to avoid misunderstandings. But in Hollywood, erasing something often only makes people talk more. Many inside MGM recalled that between 1964 and 1966, the wardrobe department had to send urgent notes to management because Elvis's outfits after each scene retained their scent for a long time, even after treatment. These notes were never officially released, but lingered as quiet studio gossip for years. What made the story unforgettable for Paul wasn't a desire to criticize anyone. It was a reminder that behind the glamorous spotlights, music legends were still human, everyday, imperfect, and real. At the same time, it opened a long list of famous names who sparked similar behind-the-scenes conversations. Paul recounted these moments not with judgment, but as someone noting what he genuinely witnessed. Right after telling the story about Elvis, Paul began mentioning a powerful Welsh vocalist known for electrifying performances in backstage situations that left crews quietly stepping aside whenever he entered a room. Then there was Bob Dylan, standing near him. Could immediately sense the sharp smell of burnt tobacco lingering in the air. Paul once joked in a private BBC for taping that some moments in an artist's life are remembered not for the music, but for the senses. Among the unusual situations he witnessed in the 1960s, the one involving Dylan left Paul both puzzled and slightly uncomfortable. So much so that he couldn't help laughing in disbelief and recalling it. On the night of August 28, 1964, at the Delmonico Hotel in New York, The Beatles had just stepped off the elevator on the 6th floor when Paul noticed the hallway air growing heavy. At first, he thought there might have been a small fire because the smell of burnt smoke mixed with old fabric was so distinct. But when room 603 opened and Dylan appeared, Paul immediately realized the scent came from the man himself. That day, Dylan wore his usual dark brown coat, the same one reporter Larry Kane later noted he carried throughout the tour from Chicago to Washington, D.C. The coat seemed to have endured many long nights, absorbing old perspiration, embedded smoke, and lingering dampness no one could identify, whether from rain, stage work, or Dylan's chaotic lifestyle. When Dylan stepped forward to greet them, Paul nearly recoiled. The scent was thick and sharp, a combination of smoke and fabric that hadn't been aired out. In a 1986 interview with The Observer, Paul described it as standing beside a coat that seemed to have a history of its own, a very long one. According to a work diary revealed by Larry Kane in 1971, the Beatles quietly joked that Dylan didn't believe in changing jackets. Despite the late August heat in New York, Dylan kept the same heavy coat on all evening. He embraced a carefree, disheveled image, once telling WNYC he didn't want to dress neatly because it didn't feel like himself. This lifestyle unintentionally fueled countless backstage anecdotes. A CBS studio staff member on West 57th Street shared on the show Inside Tracks that whenever Dylan left the recording room, they had to open the windows for nearly 20 minutes to clear the air. The lingering scent was a mixture of unfinished cigarettes, sweat from long nights, and old fabric Dylan favored for weeks. He often appeared at social gatherings in the same condition. Rolling Stone reported in 1978 that during his transition from folk to rock, Dylan's habits were erratic. He ate irregularly, slept at odd hours, forgot to change clothes, and sometimes went entire days fueled only by coffee and cigarettes, to the point where even his hair carried the smell of smoke. Paul said that when Dylan sat on the Delmonico sofa that night, the faint smoke rising from his hair and coat created a thin haze, making the room feel tight and airless, forcing Paul to turn his head to breathe. John Lennon tried to stay upbeat by asking about new music, though his eyes repeatedly blinked from the discomfort. After the meeting, George Harrison jotted a note on a small piece of paper later, auctioned in Beverly Hills, noting that Dylan was interesting to talk to, but that the coat scent was challenging. A minor scandal even arose around that very coat. In late 1965, an anonymous article appeared in the Village Voice, implying that Dylan didn't bathe often in repeated outfits for long stretches. The piece sparked debate in New York's underground art scene. Dylan never responded, unintentionally fueling the rumor. Howard Malone of the New York Herald Tribune even wrote a short commentary analyzing Dylan's rugged aura, treating the scent as part of his artistic persona. Paul never held resentment toward Dylan, continuing to admire him as one of the musicians who reshaped modern music. But the truth was that standing next to Dylan that night left Paul in a difficult position. And the sharp smell of burnt tobacco mixed with old fabric lingered in his memory for years. Dylan wasn't the last artist to leave Paul bewildered by backstage scents. As Paul hinted in a 2009 behind-the-scenes interview, there was yet another legend. Famous for a thunderous stage voice and a post-performance aroma that made entire crews quietly shift away. Mick Jagger, whom Paul jokingly called the Rolling Stones' walking sweet bomb, left a strong impression. In the late 1960s, behind the scenes of UK music programs, stories circulated among insiders about the chaos hidden beneath the glamorous surface. Paul once told BBC Radio 1 host Terry Ellis that sometimes what he remembered most about an artist wasn't the voice, but how dense the air became when that person walked past. Jagger was one such person. In early 1968, during filming for Top of the Pops at Lime Grove Studios in London, crew members whispered a half-joke, half-truth, "If Mick runs by, the breeze will warn you first." Paul initially thought it was typical backstage humor, but a few hours later, he admitted it was true. Inside Lime Grove, halogen lights had already raised the temperature by at least 5 to 7 degrees. Mick performed with full intensity, sprinting, spinning, bending, and springing back up, producing uncontrollable sweat. Tony Richmond, lead cameraman, noted that long streaks of moisture appeared on the wooden floor like wheel marks after just 2 songs. Later that year, while working with the Rolling Stones on Rock and Roll Circus at Twickenham Studios, Paul saw the effect even more clearly. Studio lights were left on continuously to maintain stable brightness, and vapor rose visibly from the cement floor. Mick arrived in a tight, sequin-covered outfit that trapped heat. As he ran laps around the stage, the rising sweat created a wave of heat that hit Paul near the stage transition point, making him feel like he had walked into a gym after peak hours. Within seconds, the intensity was so strong Paul had to step back to stabilize his breathing. The crew wasn't surprised. They were used to technicians chasing Mick with absorbent cloths, but for Paul, who was standing still, it was genuinely uncomfortable. After filming, the Rolling Stones went to dressing room for to change, but Mick kept the same sweat-soaked costume, explaining he didn't want to break the energy flow. This habit sparked backstage jokes about his natural scent intensifying during performances. Melody Maker noted in January 1969 that the crew had to clean the stage repeatedly because of Jagger's intense movement. While the article avoided mentioning odor, insiders spoke openly. Sound technician Roy Hunt recalled on Granada Television that merely opening a door Mick had recently left was enough for anyone in the hallway to guess who had been inside. A small internal story circulated that during the 1967 tour, someone joked that Mick's shirts needed industrial-strength chemicals, making half the crew laugh and the other half stay awkwardly quiet. Rumors even reached the Evening Standard, hinting that Mick was too focused on performing to bother with personal hygiene. The band quickly objected, but the story lingered. Paul always respected Mick, but the natural scent he carried during high-intensity performances was undeniably challenging. Paul once said, "Mick can sing, dance, electrify an entire audience. But standing next to him during rehearsal is a completely different experience," speaking with honesty rather than mockery. Just when Paul thought nothing else could surprise him with backstage aromas, a famous female vocalist entered the list, bringing a different kind of intensity not from exertion, but from Motown's extreme styling traditions, which had makeup teams sighing whenever she arrived. Diana Ross, whose thick hairspray mixed with the heat of Motown backstage, left a lasting impression. In 1973, when Paul visited Hitsville, USA in Detroit to watch Diana Ross rehearse, every sense seemed frozen for a few seconds. What stunned him wasn't the music or choreography, but the dense mix of hairspray and warm human heat that felt almost visible. Motown Studio A was only a few dozen square meters, originally meant for live band recordings. The ceiling was low. Technicians had sealed all windows to prevent bass frequencies from leaking onto West Grand Boulevard. Paul entered with Berry Gordy, just as the dancers were warming up. Heat from the stage lights quickly turned the room into a furnace, and everyone began sweating within minutes. Then Diana appeared. Her signature voluminous hair nearly brushed the overhead lights, held firmly in place by a hairspray that, according to former Motown stylist Lorraine Parker, could stay fixed for half a day with a single spray. On the 1985 show, Soul Time Revisited, Parker described the spray as so dense it could practically glue wallpaper. As Diana walked past Paul, the hairspray mixed with the trapped heat of the room, rising into a heavy mist that made him instinctively blink several times. By the first song, the thick fabric of her outfit had already darkened in patches. Each time she turned or lifted her arms, the air in front of Paul felt like a wave of humid density. Heat radiated from her hair, her dress, and the powerful hairspray under the intense lights. Paul was leaning down to look at a score Berry Gordy handed him when he suddenly felt as if someone had pressed a hot, chemical-scented cloth against his face. He looked up just as Diana stepped past him. In a later interview with Melody Maker, Paul described the air that day as quite heavy, but Motown backstage staff recalled the moment in far greater detail. Drum technician Marvin Pockets Lee said in the documentary Remembering Hitsville that whenever Diana wore her signature voluminous hair, industrial fans had to be brought in just to prevent those standing nearby from feeling overwhelmed. Rumors circulated inside Motown that Mary Wilson once joked, Walking behind Diana felt like moving through a cloud of chemicals. The story gained further attention when the Detroit Free Press published a small piece in late 1972 about a makeup artist who had to leave the room due to discomfort from the heavy spray. Motown denied the claim, but the rumor quietly spread through Detroit's entertainment circles, giving Diana a backstage reputation as a star with a very distinct aura. Paul didn't witness those earlier incidents, but the 1973 rehearsal alone was enough for him to understand why people spoke of Diana with a mix of respect and caution. After her third song, the heated hairspray from her hair blended with the warmth of her stage costume, creating a dense, suffocating scent, neither foul nor rotten, just heavy, as though the air itself were wrapped in a chemical film. Berry Gordy, standing beside Paul, forced polite smiles and subtly turned away each time Diana tilted her head. Paul, ever the gentleman, stayed silent, but secretly wished a door would open to let in cool air. Diana always appeared radiant, flawless, and dazzling on stage, but behind the lights existed a reality rarely mentioned. Motown's commitment to perfection sometimes came with scents so intense that people nearby had to take shallow breaths and step aside. Paul thought that after Diana Ross, no backstage aroma could challenge him again, but not long after. He met a vocalist considered the soul of the rebellious rock movement, someone whose presence was so recognizable that sound engineers joked you could tell she was in the room before she even walked in. Cher's signature scent came not from her body but from her outfit, stronger than anything else, a mix of damp fabric and accumulated sweat. During the golden era of American television in the early 1970s, Cher became a standard of boldness. Each time she appeared at CBS Television City in Los Angeles, the studio buzzed, and no one knew what she would wear next: sheer lace, metallic armor, or body-hugging chrome-like dresses that reflected the stage lights like mirrors. Outfits so striking that TV Guide and Variety noted, "She didn't need to move. Standing still was enough to own the stage." Behind the glamour, however, was a backstage tale whispered among production staff, and Paul accidentally became a witness. In March 1972, before Wings began their first U.S. tour, Paul visited the set of the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour. CBS was at the height of the variety show boom, and backstage was hectic. The moment Paul stepped into Studio 43, the first thing he sensed wasn't chatter or drums, but a warm, heavy wave of air, as if dozens of heaters were running at once. Cher appeared at that exact moment, descending the staircase in a tightly fitted dress made from hundreds of tiny metal pieces that reflected the lights in sharp flashes. Everyone was dazzled, but Paul, standing just steps away, was hit by something unexpected. A trapped, stuffy odor escaping from the inner lining of the outfit. The heat sealed inside her costume changed the air immediately, creating a wave that smelled like fabric sealed with moisture for hours, mixed with the compressed warmth of a body wrapped tightly in metal. Paul later told journalist Michael Parkinson that the sensation felt like standing right next to a row of stage lights. Even being polite, he had to take half a step back to breathe comfortably. Paul wasn't the only one affected. On Studio Memories 70s television, CBS wardrobe crew members recalled that Cher's outfits often caused a stuffy room effect, especially during long filming sessions. One anonymous stylist said they once had to use a high-powered dryer to ventilate a dress because moisture built up so quickly. A sound technician shared that if Cher stopped mid-stage for a few minutes, the air around her would noticeably warm. A minor controversy arose in 1971, when the Los Angeles Herald Examiner published an interview with a former makeup artist who hinted that Cher's tight metal outfits not only made the skin struggle to breathe, but left a distinctive damp smell in the dressing room. The show's team strongly objected, claiming the story had been exaggerated. Yet the rumors still spread quietly through television. Circles a small secret everyone knew, but no one said out loud. Paul knew none of those rumors that day. He simply witnessed Cher stepping off stage during a break. With each step she took, a wave of warm air, like heat from a boiler mixed with the metallic scent of her fabric, drifted past him. Cher remained dazzling, smiling, radiant as always. But Paul could only inhale lightly through his mouth to lessen the stifling sensation. The scent wasn't unpleasant in a negative sense. It was the smell of exhaustion trapped behind multiple layers of non-breathable costume. Difficult to describe, invisible to the eye, yet unmistakable to anyone standing nearby. Cher's moment made Paul feel as if he had experienced every stage scent possible. But the list unexpectedly expanded in the most unpredictable direction. Aretha Franklin followed. When she walked past, the smell of sweat was incredibly strong, not pleasant, but sharp and intense. There was a rumor in the soul music world that Paul had often heard from fellow musicians, which he always assumed was playful exaggeration. People said Aretha didn't sing with her throat, she sang with her entire body. It sounded poetic, but when Paul witnessed a very real moment from Aretha in 1973, he understood just how literal that phrase could be. The story began long before, in the spring of 1967. When Aretha recorded Respect at Atlantic Studios in New York, the studio was already cramped, filled with band members, horn sections, and engineers, all sweating in the heat. Producer Jerry Wexler later recounted on PBS Music Makers, revisited in 1979, that Aretha sang with such intensity that the air in the room changed as if every high note carried a burst of warm breath from her whole body. Veteran technician Charles Boyd noted that whenever she belted a powerful note, the control room glass fogged up from moisture. These stories sounded exaggerated until Paul experienced something similar, not in a studio, but at a crowded gala. In September 1973, Capitol Records held a major event in Chicago, attended by artists Paul knew well. Aretha performed the closing number, and Paul, wanting a good view, stood near the aisle beside the curtain wings. When she finished, the stage lights hit her directly. The shimmering fabric of her dress darkened in patches from perspiration. Stepping down past Paul on her way backstage, he felt a thick, warm wave of air brush across his face. It wasn't unpleasant in a negative sense, but extremely strong, the scent of a performer who had given everything, trapped under her stage outfit for hours. Paul said it jolted him awake, and he instinctively straightened his posture to regulate his breathing. Others described similar experiences. A choir member on Soul Stories Live in 1984 said they sometimes had to change positions because the warm moisture rising from her gown felt like standing next to a steam machine. During a 1968 Detroit show, lighting technician Eddie Marshall even had to wipe the stair rail after Aretha walked down because condensation had settled visibly. Small anecdotes occasionally appeared as humorous newspaper snippets. The Chicago Sun-Times once wrote about the warmth of the Angel of Soul, causing a photographer to switch lenses because condensation blurred his shots. Though playful, the article fueled rumors that Aretha carried a halo of heat wherever she performed. Paul didn't believe all exaggerations, but his experience in Chicago was unmistakable. When Aretha passed by, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Her breath was heavy, her shoulders rose and fell with effort, and even the airflow from her steps carried a dense, vivid scent, as if the entire room had sung with her. He never felt upset. Paul understood that to sing like that and shake a hall, she had to give everything. But it didn't change the fact that her natural scent after such performances was intense, enough to make him pause. Yet even this wasn't the most shocking part of Paul's memories. The next person wasn't a soul legend or a rock star, but someone far more familiar, someone he had worked with for years. That closeness was exactly why he couldn't avoid the scent he once described as the most overwhelming of my entire career. John Lennon. Paul joked in a 1988 Liverpool radio interview, "I never liked being in the studio with him for too long. I could tell John was coming, even before hearing him. The air would change first." It sounded humorous, but it was remarkably close to the truth. Stories like the sheen of John Lennon's sweat lingering on the Cavern Club stage for months stuck to Paul's memory. He remembered it vividly. "I just couldn't take it in. For days, you just couldn't think that he was gone."
Oh, you had cramps.
Sweaty venues of early Beatles shows, John Lennon's presence was unforgettable, not just for his voice or energy, but for the physical intensity he radiated. During the summer of 1961, at the Cavern Club on Matthew Street, the stage was narrow, the ceiling low, Cigarette smoke hung thick in the air, and the audience pressed in so tightly there was barely space to move. John, young and fierce, poured every ounce of breath into the microphone, constantly sweating. Paul recalled that whenever John stood close to harmonize, he could feel the warm moisture rising from John's shirt onto his own side. Ray McFall, a former Cavern employee, later joked on BBC Miri side that the microphone cloths always smelled strongest of John's sweat. We could tell how hard John sang just by the cloth. It sounded amusing, but it revealed a reality. John's sweat wasn't fleeting. It lingered as the Beatles' schedule intensified in the mid-1960s. So did the intensity of their presence. During the Revolver sessions in 1966, engineer Jeff Emmerich noted that John would sometimes arrive late on hot summer mornings, still damp with sweat. Studio 2 at Abbey Road was tightly sealed for vocal precision. So when John moved across the room, his natural scent spread like a thin mist, prompting staff to turn on extra fans. Paul recalled one June afternoon, after John finished recording, she said he walked past Paul toward the hallway. The air shifted instantly to a dense, slightly sour scent. Not horrible, just very real, Paul told journalist David Frost in 1984. Cracking open the studio door for relief, Paul couldn't escape John. Even if he wanted to, they shared stages, microphones, and countless hours together. The harder John sang, the stronger the scent. The louder he laughed, the more warmth drifted through the air. Tony Sheridan, recalling the Hamburg gigs, said John's sweat would drip onto guitar strings and microphones, making the stage atmosphere heavy as a steam room. Sound managers at the Star Club even had to replace microphone covers twice as often on nights when John performed. Satirical mentions in the Liverpool Echo about the scent of youth unintentionally added to John's backstage lore. Paul never shared these stories to mock John. They were brothers and partners, but he admitted that John's sweat was one of the most unforgettable, sometimes difficult experiences of their early years. John never intended discomfort. He was simply explosive, focused, and unaware of his physical state. But that scent became part of Beatles history, etched clearly in Paul's memory. From John. Paul's list of intense backstage presences shifted into a new chapter, one that no longer involved distant colleagues, but someone even closer: George Harrison. Unlike John, George was quiet, calm, and unassuming, yet his scent was surprisingly potent. During a cramped Abbey Road rehearsal in early 1965, For You Like Me Too Much, George walked in wearing his favorite black wool turtleneck. Paul, speaking to engineer Norman Smith with his back turned, immediately sensed a warm, dense smell drifting from George's thick collar. George, absorbed in tuning his guitar, was oblivious. In a 1985 Abbey Road interview, Paul explained that George habitually covered himself neck to chin, regardless of weather. The fabrics he chose excellent for retaining heats also. Retained scent remarkably well. One vivid memory occurred during a drive from Birmingham to Manchester in April 1966. In a closed tour van with minimal ventilation, George sat next to Paul, wearing the same thick turtleneck from the Birmingham Odeon show. Within 15 minutes, the air inside was filled with a warm, dense, slightly damp odor, not overpowering but thick, like heated, wet fabric drying in a cupboard. Paul and Ringo discreetly opened the windows to breathe, while George remained oblivious, gazing out the glass. Tour staffer Terry Doran later recalled often having to air out the van before departure because of George's outfit. Internal notes from 1967 circulated quietly, observing that George's presence carried a scent all its own. Subtle yet unmistakably quiet force, in contrast to John's explosive intensity. George, Harrison's quietly potent presence, and Tom Jones's explosive energy marked two very different ends of Paul McCartney's backstage experiences. George's story revolved around subtle persistence. Harrison's woolen collars and heat-retaining stage costumes held scent long after performance. During the June 1966 Budokan show in Japan, the backstage area had almost no ventilation. George entered wearing his high-colored costume, and a Japanese security staffer later recounted stepping outside for a few minutes. just to breathe comfortably. No one blamed Georgia. He was quiet, reserved, but his scent changed the room the instant he walked in. A 1967 New Musical Express article hinted at a Beatle, causing backstage chatter for wearing outfits too long. Those in the touring crew knew it was George. Paul laughed when asked, saying, "Of course it was George." He was quiet, but his clothes weren't. Unlike with distant artists, Paul couldn't avoid George. He was beside him in vans, rehearsal rooms, and on stage. George's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the persistent presence of his clothing's warmth and scent. Tom Jones, by contrast, was the very definition of theatrical force. Known for a voice like fire and movements that seemed to bend space, his backstage aura was equally intense. Paul recalled the autumn of 1971 at a charity performance in London, after Tom finished Delilah. The stage erupted and the audience cheered, but it was backstage where Paul felt the full effect. The microphone Tom had used was soaked, and the air surrounding him was thick with a mix of heat, sweat, cologne, hair oil, and warmed stage fabric. Paul told Q magazine, "I adore Tom, but standing right next to him after Delilah, that takes courage." Technicians joked that the faint mist around Tom was heavier than stage fog, and industrial fans were often required to clear dressing rooms after his sets. At a Portsmouth Guildhall show, 2 dancers had to step back 3 paces just to avoid the dense heat wave following his final song. The combination of intense physical performance and layered scents made Tom a walking whirlwind of heat. As London TV crews described him, Paul never criticized him. He admired the power but acknowledged that even a brief encounter demanded careful breathing and a respectful step back. In essence, George and Tom represented extremes of backstage presence. George's calm, composed exterior hid a quietly persistent scent carried by fabric and body heat.
Ow.
While Tom's high-energy performances created an almost tangible atmospheric force, for Paul, these experiences added layers to his understanding of live performance. Not just the music, but the physicality, the scent, and the invisible aura that artists radiate. Consciously or not, Janis Joplin completed Paul McCartney's unusual and surprisingly intimate list of unforgettable stage and backstage scents. Unlike other artists, her presence was a literal force. Liquor, smoke, and sweat blending into a sharp, tangible energy that dominated any room she entered. At Laurel Canyon in November 1969, Paul encountered her up close for the first time. She arrived like a whirlwind, dusty boots, wild hair, and mascara strix, but it was the smell that hit him hardest. Southern comfort soaked into her clothes, Marlboro smoke clinging to her hair, and the sweat of countless performances. Paul later recalled the sharpness as almost physical, forcing him to step back. Yet the experience left him with a clear understanding of why she symbolized rebellion. Backstage, crews confirmed the impact. Microphones had to be scrubbed with vinegar and alcohol after her shows, and technicians joked that anyone using her mic afterward would need cough syrup. The scent wasn't unpleasant, it was honesty incarnate. A vivid imprint of her lifestyle and the raw energy she poured into her music. Unlike perfume or costume-enhanced warmth from other performers, Janis's aura carried the essence of her life on the road, smoky bars, late nights, and unfiltered performance. For Paul, her presence was a revelation. Across all the artists he'd met, Diana Ross, Cher, Aretha Franklin, John, and George Lennon, Tom Jones, none had left such a direct, almost physical memory through scent alone. Standing near Janis, he felt the air shift, felt her energy saturate the room, and realized that experiencing live music went far beyond hearing. It engaged all the senses. In the end, these backstage anecdotes reveal an often overlooked side of music history. The stage isn't just about sound and lights, it's about presence, energy, and yes, scent. Paul's stories remind us that the invisible traces of performers, the warmth of their bodies, the perfume or smoke clinging to their clothes, the sweat of sheer exertion shape memory as much as the music itself. And Janis Joplin? She was the apex of that sensory experience, a true force of nature whose very essence demanded recognition.